Okay, you can give me immediately, or you can give me a countdown or something. Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this discussion on vision for the recovery and progressive taxation for a post-COVID world. My name is Emma Agyemang, and I'm Global Tax Correspondent at the Financial Times. I'm really delighted to be hosting this event today, which has been organised by FEPS, FES, and ICRICT. They've put together a fantastic panel of very distinguished guests, EU Economics Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni and Professor Joseph Stiglitz. Neither of them need much introduction, but just to give you a small gist, Paolo Gentiloni has been the EU's Commissioner for Economy since 2019. He previously served as Italy's Prime Minister between 2016 and 2018. And before that, held ministerial posts in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Communications. Joseph E. Stiglitz is a Nobel Prize laureate and professor of economics at Columbia University. He is also the co-founder and president of the Initiative for Policy Dialogue at Columbia University and a member of ICRICT, Independent Commission for the Reform of International Corporate Taxation. Professor Stiglitz is a former chief economist of the World Bank and in 2011 was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. So thank you both very much for joining me to discuss what is a very interesting topic, especially at this critical juncture for international tax and the global economy. And I'm sure we're going to discuss the reasons why, but the big issue, of course, is COVID-19, which has completely upended all our lives, changed the way we do business, and of course has been a devastating health and economic crisis for the whole world. As a result of the massive problems COVID-19 has caused, governments around the world have spent huge amounts of money propping up companies, workers, whole economies, public services, pouring huge amounts of money to support that. And of course, we're not yet out of the woods, as the situation in India is very clearly showing. But at the same time, talk has already started to turn to tax and how tax can play a role in the recovery, particularly progressive taxation. I'm sure you would all have seen yesterday, President Joe Biden gave a big speech in Congress talking about how he sees, how he'd like to see America recover from the pandemic and the plans, multi-trillion-dollar plans he has to help do that. That includes investment in infrastructure, supporting and improving America's social safety net. And the big thing that he wants to do is to get that paid for by increases on tax rises from the wealthiest in society and corporations. Also here in Europe, we've seen the EU deliver a really massive recovery fund, Next Generation EU, that includes 750 billion euros to design to help countries, member states in the EU recover from the crisis. So that's the big picture. The other thing I should mention is the ongoing negotiations at the OECD. We've got 139 countries discussing how to update the global tax system and how to make sure multinationals end up paying more tax as a result. So, as I say, a lot's going on at the moment. And so my question to both of you to get us started thinking about some of these issues is, how do you think countries should be seeking to recover from the pandemic? And what role in particular do you think progressive taxation should play? So if I could please start with Commissioner Gentiloni.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning, Professor Stiglitz, and good afternoon, everyone hearing here from Europe. Well, I would say that there is a message which is indeed quite resounding in both sides of the Atlantic. And the message is to try to build back better, which means that, of course, we are still in the fight against the pandemic. Vaccination rollout started slowly in the European Union, but indeed, I think we are now catching up, and some degree of optimism is there. But I think we need a few conditions to have a good recovery. And I would mention three of them. First, graduality, because we should not repeat the mistakes that were done in the previous financial crisis to withdraw too soon support to our economies, to exaggerate the need for immediate fiscal consolidation. Second is we need to have clear priorities. And here I think European Union in this case has very strongly defined its priorities. In a word, it is the fact that sustainable growth is our priority, and we should try to adapt all our efforts and also our fiscal rules to this target. And third, we have really an unprecedented opportunity to find an agreement on global taxation. In different capacities, I followed this discussion since 5 or 6 years, and for one reason or another, we were always not very near to possible agreements. Now, after the change in the US administration, I think that the discussion is absolutely on the right track. Of course, we are also very impressed by President Biden's message yesterday. Personally, I loved this message because in some sense, I also hear some European flavor in this message. I mean, support to what we call here welfare state, the families, jobs, automatic stabilizers. Well, I am excessively showing EU pride, of course, but in a certain sense, I think it was a message in this direction, and the spillover will be very positive also for Europe in terms of trade and, of course, of this global taxation file, which is near to a possible agreement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner. Turning to Professor Stiglitz, the same question to you. How do you think countries should be recovering from the pandemic, and what role do you think progressive taxation should play?
I agree with everything the Commissioner has said. I would say from this side of the Atlantic, there's the additional problem of the high level of inequality, which is much larger in the United States than in Europe. And that is why President Biden has put such emphasis on some of those issues that Europe has addressed before, families, a stronger safety net. The issue of progressive taxation fits in then if you're going to build back better, if you're going to address the problem of sustainability, of climate change, our deficits in our infrastructure, our inequality, you have to have revenues. And where are the revenues? There's only one place to get the revenues. That's where the money is. And where's the money? Especially in the United States, it's at the top, and in the global corporations who have been very successful in using globalization to avoid taxation. I've been watching this process of tax avoidance for a quarter century. And what I can, as long as we worked at it, they've gotten clever and clever at avoiding taxation. And that's why this idea of a global minimum tax is absolutely essential. What I was worried about in some of the earlier discussions was that the global minimum tax would be set at a very low level. And that minimum tax would then work out to be the maximum tax, and an effort designed to make sure that the corporations paid a fair share would wind up being an initiative to make sure they paid less than their fair share. And so that's where Biden's initiative of a 21% minimum tax, ICRICT has said that it should be 25%. I don't want to split hairs. I do think 21% is a little low, but I want to emphasize that should not be a point of compromise. Lowering it below 21% would be undermining the intent of this whole effort, which is to make corporations pay their fair share.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Stiglitz. I suppose my question to both of you then is, if you both agree that this is, as you said, as the Commissioner said, an unprecedented moment to get a global agreement, and 21% is something that you seem to both support. Do you think that figure is actually going to be what is decided, or is there a risk that that is watered down? I mean, we heard last week from the Irish Finance Minister saying he thought Ireland was quite happy with 12.5%. Thank you very much. So yeah, I'd put the question to you, maybe to Professor Stiglitz first. Do you think that 21% is actually going to be agreed upon at the OECD?
Yes, I do. I am certainly very hopeful. And it's partly of the circumstances we're in now, where because of COVID-19, we need revenue very badly. And COVID-19 has made us aware of a lot of the other problems that have been festering. And that's why this motto, Build Back Better, the problems of the green transition, the problems of inequality, the problems in the United States of deficit and infrastructure. So the need for revenues is absolutely there. Let me emphasize the flaws in Ireland's position. Much of the tax revenue that Ireland gets is a result of stealing tax revenue from its neighbors, from its other members of the EU. It's a negative sum policy where they take away a lot of revenue from the other countries and they get a little revenue for themselves. It is not the kind of thing which good neighbors do to their neighbors. So I think at one time or another, the EU would have had to address this issue anyway. The second thing is the basic principle that I pointed out when I was chief economist of the World Bank. The way you attract investment is not the investments. It's investments in people, trained labor force, it's in infrastructure, and you can't make those public investments without tax revenue.
Okay, thank you. And to Commissioner Gentiloni, I mean, specifically on this idea of 21% and the fact that some EU member states have already signaled they wouldn't be particularly keen on that. What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is that I really appreciate the American perspective. Of course, we will have negotiation, not only because of reluctancy in some European member states, but because also other global players. I remember discussions on this minimal taxation with some emerging economies and others in the G20 when the proposal in the table was a 12.5 taxation. So I expect that this will not be an easy task to finalize this discussion. I appreciate the perspective the American administration is putting on the table, and also the fact that indeed the US administration envisage to adopt domestic tax measures to encourage other countries to adopt this minimum taxation. And this, I think, is a very important tool. To be honest, we need in Europe also this kind of driver, because we know the difficulties. Professor Stiglitz wrote books about our fiscal and economic rules. So he knows very well that we have a unanimity rule on taxation, and that we, I am quite optimistic that this global boost will allow us also to overcome internal difficulties. But honestly, I think that the discussion will be an interesting one in the next weeks. But the American position is really changing the game.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, the next question I wanted to touch on was basically the other pillar. We talked about the global minimum tax. That's what the OECD sort of refers to as pillar number 2. But pillar number 1 is what they're talking about. Deciding which countries have taxing rights over various different multinationals. And I was just wondering, one of the things that the US administration has said that they want to see out of these negotiations is an end to sort of unilateral digital taxes that have grown up, have been put in place by various countries recently. So I suppose my first question to Professor Stiglitz on this, do you think that that should be the goal of the negotiations, or should countries still have the right to bring in digital tax levies regardless?
Well, I think you need to see the digital tax levies as a broader issue of how you allocate the global taxes. So let's say we have a global minimum tax. How do you allocate that across countries? And the principles that worked in the past are not going to work in the future and don't work very well with respect to digital taxation. So you are going to have to deal with the problem of digital taxation one way or the other. So for instance, there used to be something called a physical presence rule, but with digital, with the new digital economy, you can be very present without a physical presence. So you're going to have to deal with that. The transfer price system is a very flawed system of allocating tax revenues because it allows for manipulation in ways that move tax revenues towards low tax jurisdiction, even when there's no economic activity. So what I believe is you are going to have new rules that address the problem of digital taxation, that also address the problem of the defects in the transfer price system. And I think the basis in the OECD of Pillar 1, which is this residual tax principle, where very little was subject to this Pillar 1, is a very fundamentally flawed, both in economic theory and in terms of economic practice and economic justice. So I think that is a pillar. Pillar 1 has to be rethought completely. There's one thing, okay. I have to, another meeting at 10 o'clock. which I hope you knew about.
Yes, I do. Don't worry, I do. So yes, we're going to have to say goodbye to Professor Stiglitz now, but thank you so much for your time, and yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Commissioner Gentiloni, same question to you, really, because I know that the EU has talked about its digital levy. How does that fit in with what the Americans have proposed on the OECD negotiations?
Well, first, until 2 or 3 months ago, of course, we know that the discussion on this so-called Pillar 1, so to put it simply, let us call it the digital taxation, was in a stalemate at the OECD level because of the reluctancy in the US side. Then the new administration announced quite soon that they were withdrawing their proposal of the so-called safe harbor, and this reopened completely the discussion on this Pillar 1. Now the discussion is ongoing. I think that we still lack a few details on this for an assessment. What is clear from the messages that we have from the US administration is that their idea is to shift towards a taxation of the giants, so to say, and the giants that also have been winning the pandemic. This, of course, will include some of the main digital giants, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 of these, and will refer, at least partially, to the target of reallocation of taxing rights that Professor Stiglitz was mentioning. So in the 21st century, we have to collect tax where profits and revenues are, not where the headquarters of companies are. And this is, I think, included in this idea, but at the same time, this reallocation of taxing rights has a specificity on the digital companies, which is the reason why we are working after being tasked to do so from the European Council and the European Parliament on a European proposal of a digital levy. I want to be very clear that this in any way will undermine the global discussion, the effort to reach an agreement on Pillar 1, that we will design this to be perfectly compatible with which will come out from the OECD global agreement and eventually converge if this is needed to this global agreement. So this is what we are working on, and the progress is there on Pillar 1, but we are not yet with sufficient details, I think, to assess the impact of this new approach. Final point, we are, as always, the European Union asking these two pillars to go hand in hand. So we can't have one of these without the others. But I think that this position is fully shared by Secretary Yellen.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned, obviously, you don't have all the details. Any particular details that you would like to see more of before you feel that the EU Commission can fully make its mind up on this?
Well, the European Commission is actively participating and supporting with the other members, European members of the G20, the discussion that are going on. I understand from the OECD and from the Italian presidency of the G20 that things are moving, that there are indeed chance to reach an agreement in the next months. But of course, the definition of, for example, threshold, the dimensions of involved companies, the dimension based on what? Based on EBIT, based on revenues, based on market capitalization. And these elements change a lot of things about this issue. And I understand that the discussion is just beginning on this.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. I'd also like to just ask more generally about, progressive taxation and the sense that certainly people in the EU, members of the public, feel that multinationals need to pay more tax and generally feel like they're, not getting a fair deal compared to other sort of actors in the public. I just wondered, do you think that in this post-COVID recovery, it's going to be more important for multinationals to be seen to contribute to the recovery?
Well, for sure, because of course we know that this pandemic did not reduce social distress and inequalities, quite the opposite. We had increasing social distress and increasing inequalities. And then we have very clearly winners of this crisis. And of course, first of all, the digital giants, but not only the digital giants. Of course, we couldn't say also all the big multinationals, because we know that in some sectors, situation is very, very difficult also for big companies. But overall, we supported our businesses with an incredible amount of money, more or less 3 trillion euros in state aid, extraordinary state aid guarantees. This created as a consequence the fact that in 2020 we had the lowest level of bankruptcies since years. So I think that the European Commission and the national governments did their job to support business, corporate, and the economy, but at the same time, without a fair share on taxation, it will be very difficult to support the word better in our building back. So if we want the green transition, if we want more resilient societies, we need fairer taxation. Of course, you know very well that this at the EU level is always a mix between common task and targets and national autonomy. And this is maybe the more difficult part of this task, because we can't harmonize and unify from Brussels taxation systems that are very different, but at the same time we should work, for example, on environmental taxation, digital taxation, with common goals and common tools.
Yes, and you mentioned the environmental taxation, because that's another question I wanted to ask you about, the carbon border tax adjustment that the EU is working on. I just wondered what the progress is on that in terms of, are you aware sort of which kind of countries might be sort of hardest hit by that? You know, what is going on with the latest with that tax?
Well, we are having the impact assessment of the proposal. The proposal will come out at the end of June. Of course, the proposal tabled by the European Commission are not executive orders. So you know very well that we will need a certain amount of time then to adopt these proposals. And so we are fully open during this amount of time to converge with global and international partners, because the door is open. We are quite happy to be early mover, as we have been on this environmental transition in the last 1.5 years, but at the same time, we need an international cooperation. What kind of sectors will be initially included in this mechanism? Well, this is part of the impact assessment, but we are reflecting mostly on sectors like iron, steel, cement, fertilizers. And if you ask what other countries exporting in EU, for example, these sectors, well, the answer is among the main importers from our EU side, we have Egypt, Ukraine, China, Russia, maybe Korea. These are probably among the main exporters in Europe of iron, steel, cement, fertilizers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And the other area of which I wanted to come back to, because I mentioned right at the start that the EU had set up its recovery fund, Next Generation EU, and as part of that, you're requiring member states to put in a national recovery plan, which talks about the areas of reform to improve their economies, to gain access to some of these funds in the Next Generation EU. And I know, Commissioner, that you've said that you want to see some member states that have facilitate aggressive tax planning, to, you know, show plans for how they're going to reform that. I just wondered if you had seen any of those suggestions come through yet from member states.
Well, discussion is ongoing. We have in our recommendation to member states, we addressed the issue of aggressive tax planning with, in particular, to 6 European countries, and we ask to these countries to use the big opportunity of the Next Generation EU and of the recovery plan to make progress. We know that this will not solve all the problems in one moment, also because some of these countries are not beneficiary of large envelopes of our support program, but discussions are ongoing, and I expect that some progress will come, but we will insist with other tools, and of course a global agreement on minimal taxation would be a game changer for this.
That's great. Thank you very much, Commissioner. I believe we're sort of running out of time at the moment. So unless there's anything in particular that you wanted to say more on the issue of progressive taxation as it relates to the EU. If you do, please do so.
No, but we are there. I think we are very strongly supported by the European Parliament. This is interesting, I think, to note that we know that there is difficulty to reach unanimity among member states, but we should also be aware that after this pandemic, the pressure of the public opinion and the strong alignment of the European Parliament could create new conditions to make progress in some files where we were not able to progress in the last 5 or 10 years.
A very important point to end on. Sorry, I missed that.
No, I just say that it was a conclusive optimism.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Okay, well, thank you so much, Commissioner. Really appreciate your time. And thank you very much to everybody who's been watching as well, and to FEPS, FES and ICRICT for organising what I hope you'll agree has been a really interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you.